A whisper of change. The night air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of rain-soaked pavement and the faint aroma of coffee drifting from a small diner on the corner of a quiet street. Whitmore's diner wasn't special. Not to most people, anyway. Just another place, with flickering neon lights, worn leather booths, and the low hum of conversation blending with the clinking of silverware. But to Jonathan Whitmore, standing outside in the cold, staring through the fogged-up windows, it was more than that. It was a memory, a ghost, a place frozen in time. He exhaled, his breath curling in the chilly air as his fingers tightened around the collar of his coat. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not as a man looking for something he'd lost. And yet, he pushed. The door opened, the bell above chimed, and the warmth of the diner wrapped around him like a forgotten embrace. The scent of coffee, grilled sandwiches, and something faintly sweet filled his lungs. A couple of customers glanced up, but quickly returned to their meals. No one recognized him. And that's exactly what he wanted. Then he saw her. She moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing a tray in one hand, offering a tired smile to an impatient customer. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, wisps falling around her face. But it was her eyes that caught him, the kind of eyes that told a story without saying a word. Elena Carter. She had no idea who he was, but something about the way her shoulders tensed, the way she lingered by the coffee pot, as if steeling herself. For another long night made Jonathan pause. He had come here to disappear, to find a moment of quiet in a world that never stopped demanding things from him. But as he watched Eleanor wipe her eyes quickly before turning back to serve another customer with a forced smile, he realized maybe he wasn't the only one carrying ghosts tonight. Her silent cry isn't just another love story. It's about loss, resilience, and the quiet moments that change everything. It's about two people, both broken in their own ways, finding something they never expected in each other, a reason to hope again. If you love deeply emotional stories with unforgettable characters, if you've ever felt lost but kept going, anyway, then this journey is for you. Hit that subscribe button to follow along as we uncover the layers of Jonathan and Elena's story. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single chapter, because sometimes the quietest cries lead to the most powerful endings. Waitress breaks down in the kitchen. The undercover CEO overhears and takes action. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and faint traces of rain that had fallen earlier in the day. Jonathan Whitmore stepped out of his sleek black sedan, the cold biting through his tailored coat as he stood in front of Whitmore's Diner, one of the many restaurants under the empire he had built. To any passerby, he looked like just another well-dressed man stopping by for a meal. No one would suspect that he was the very owner of this establishment, the man whose name was etched onto every contract and business agreement tied to the place. But tonight, Jonathan wasn't here as a CEO. He was here as a man haunted by memories. The diner, though small, had once been his wife Emily's favorite place. She had loved the simplicity of it, the red leather booths, the smell of fresh coffee, the hum of quiet conversations blending with the clinking of silverware. But Emily was gone now, and everything felt hollow in her absence. Jonathan inhaled deeply, steadying himself before stepping inside. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, drawing a few glances from the handful of customers seated inside. The warm glow of the overhead lights cast a golden hue over the space, making it feel familiar yet foreign. A waitress, Elena Carter, turned towards him with a practiced smile. The kind of smile that seemed warm at first glance, but held exhaustion beneath the surface. "Good evening, sir. Would you like a booth or a seat at the counter?" she asked, her voice kind but noticeably weary. Jonathan hesitated. A booth would remind him too much of the past. Instead, he opted for the counter, taking a seat near the register. "Coffee, please," he said, glancing up at her. Elena nodded and turned towards the coffee pot, filling a ceramic mug before placing it in front of him. As she moved, Jonathan observed her carefully, not in a scrutinizing way, but with an unshakable sense that something was weighing on her. Her eyes were distant, her hands slightly shaky, as she placed the coffee down. "You okay?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Elena blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Just a long day." Jonathan knew that answer well. He had given it himself 1,000 times, back when people asked how he was coping after Emily's death. A long day was often just a shield, a way to deflect the truth. Before he could press further, a loud, disgruntled voice broke through the quiet hum of the diner. "Hey, lady, I said no onions on my burger. Are you deaf or just stupid?" Jonathan turned his head sharply. A man at one of the booths was scowling at Elena, waving his plate in frustration. The moment she saw the order, her face paled. "I'm so sorry, sir." "I'll fix it right away," she said, her voice too apologetic, too nervous for such a simple mistake. Jonathan felt his stomach tighten as he watched her hurry back into the kitchen. The customer muttered something under his breath, rolling his eyes, and Jonathan clenched his jaw. He had zero patience for people who thought belittling others made them important. But it wasn't just the rudeness that bothered him. It was Elena's reaction. She looked like someone who was used to being on the receiving end of disappointment. Minutes passed. Jonathan sipped his coffee, but his mind was elsewhere. Then he heard it. A soft, muffled sound coming from the kitchen, crying. Jonathan turned his head slightly, his sharp ears picking up the sound of shaky, uneven breaths, the kind that someone makes when they're trying their hardest to keep it together, but failing. Elena. She was crying in the kitchen. He set his cup down, his heartbeat slow and steady as he listened. He knew he should mind his own business. He barely knew this woman, but something in him wouldn't let him ignore it. Through the small window leading into the kitchen, he saw her standing near the prep counter, gripping the edge of the stainless steel surface like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Another waitress, a younger girl with red hair, hesitated beside her. "Elena, do you want me to—" "No," Elena said quickly, wiping her face. "I'm fine, I just—" She exhaled shakily. "I just need a second." Jonathan sat still, conflicted. He had spent years perfecting the art of detachment. Ever since Emily died, he had taught himself that getting involved, caring too much, only led to pain. But at that moment, he saw a reflection of himself in Elena, a person who was breaking on the inside, but still forcing themselves to go on. He couldn't just walk away. Elena emerged from the kitchen a few moments later, her face carefully composed, but her eyes slightly red. She returned to the counter, offering a weak smile. "Sorry about that. Can I get you anything else?" Jonathan studied her for a long moment. "Are you really fine?" His voice was quieter this time, more serious. Elena hesitated. For a fraction of a second, something raw and unguarded flashed across her face, but then, just as quickly, she tucked it away. "Yeah, just a long day," she repeated. Jonathan could have let it go. He could have just nodded, finished his coffee and left, but instead he made a choice. "I'm Jonathan, by the way," he said, offering a hand. She blinked at him, surprised. Most customers didn't introduce themselves to waitresses. After a brief hesitation, she shook his hand. "Elena," he gave a small nod. "Nice to meet you, Elena." And in that moment, he knew this wasn't going to be his last visit to Whitmore's diner, because whether she knew it or not, Elena Carter had just changed the course of his life. The next morning, Elena Carter woke up to the same suffocating weight pressing against her chest, the crushing reality of her life. Her tiny one-bedroom apartment was barely holding together. The ceiling fan creaked, the heater struggled against the autumn chill, and the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter seemed to mock her. In the next room, Liam, Her 6-year-old son was still asleep, his small body curled beneath a thin blanket. His peaceful face was the only thing keeping her together. "Just keep going," she reminded herself, the same mantra she had whispered every day since David, her late husband, died in that accident 2 years ago. Shaking off the overwhelming exhaustion, Eleanor got dressed and hurriedly prepared a peanut butter sandwich for Liam's school lunch. She didn't have much, but at least he wouldn't go hungry. She brushed a kiss against his forehead before waking him. He was the reason she kept pushing forward, no matter how tired, no matter how hopeless. The bell above the door jingled as Elena walked into Whitmore's diner, the comforting smell of coffee and freshly baked bread wrapping around her. "Morning." Elena, Maggie, the red-haired waitress, greeted her with a warm but knowing smile. "Rough night," Elena forced a chuckle. "Aren't they all?" Maggie shook her head. "I still don't know how you do it." Elena didn't respond, just tied her apron and got to work. She had barely started refilling coffee cups when the door swung open. Jonathan Whitmore stepped inside. Elena froze for half a second before catching herself. What is he doing here again? Most customers pass through the diner once, maybe twice a week, but twice in less than 24 hours. That was unusual. Jonathan took the same seat at the counter, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "Coffee?" she asked, reaching for the pot. "Please," he said, his voice even. Elena poured the steaming liquid into his mug, trying to keep her hands steady. Something about him made her nervous, not in a threatening way, but in the way that made her feel seen. She wasn't used to that. Jonathan watched her carefully. "Long day." Her eyes flickered up to meet his. It just started. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "That's not what I meant." Her grip on the coffee pot tightened. "Look, I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. Really." Jonathan didn't look convinced, but to her relief, he didn't push. Instead, he simply nodded. "All right." She moved to another customer, relieved that the conversation was over. Except it wasn't. Half an hour later, he was still there. Elena stole glances at him as she worked, perplexed by his presence. He didn't have a newspaper. He wasn't typing away on a laptop like other business types. He was just watching. At one point, she placed a fresh coffee pot on the counter, and he finally spoke. "You're good at this." Elena blinked. "At what?" "Smiling when you're exhausted. Pretending everything is fine when it's not." Her breath caught in her throat. "Who does he think he is?" She didn't need a stranger analyzing her like a book. "Like I said, I'm fine." Jonathan exhaled, his fingers drumming lightly against his coffee mug. "You remind me of someone," he admitted, his voice quieter now. Elena paused, something in his tone shifting the energy between them. "Who?" she asked. Jonathan hesitated, then looked away, his jaw tightening. "My wife," he said finally. Elena's heart dropped. She hadn't expected that. A moment of heavy silence settled between them. "I lost her 2 years ago," he continued, his voice carefully controlled. She used to smile like that too, like the world was on her shoulders, but she didn't want anyone to know. Elena swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. She knew that feeling all too well. She wasn't sure what made her say it, but before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I lost my husband too." Jonathan's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "How long?" 2 years, she answered, her voice almost inaudible. Something shifted. It wasn't sympathy, not the condescending kind she hated. It was understanding. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone truly got it. Before either of them could say anything more, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She frowned and quickly checked the screen. It was from Liam's school. "Oh, God." Her stomach twisted as she answered, stepping away from the counter. "Hello, Miss Carter. This is Principal Andrews. Liam isn't feeling well. He has a fever of 102, and we need someone to pick him up." Elena's mind raced. She couldn't leave work. She couldn't afford to, But Liam needed her. I'll be there as soon as I can, she said, hanging up. Her pulse racing. When she turned back, Jonathan was watching her. "Something wrong?" he asked. Elena clenched her jaw, forcing a breath. "My son's sick. I have to go, but I can't." She stopped, suddenly realizing she had no one to call. David was gone. There was no backup plan. Her boss wouldn't let her leave, not without docking her already small paycheck. "What do I do?" She closed her eyes, swallowing the lump in her throat. And then Jonathan stood up. "I can drive you," he said simply. Elena stared at him, startled. "What? I'll take you to your son," he repeated. "You need to get to him, don't you?" Elena hesitated, every instinct telling her that accepting help was dangerous. But when she thought of Liam, his tiny, feverish body waiting for her, she didn't have a choice. She nodded. "All right," she said softly, and just like that, Jonathan Whitmore, a man she barely knew, had become her lifeline. The drive to Willow Creek Elementary was silent at first. Elena sat stiffly in the passenger seat of Jonathan's car, her fingers tangled together in her lap, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Liam's fever gets worse? What if I lose this job for leaving mid-shift? What if I made a mistake getting in this car with him? She stole a glance at Jonathan, who kept his focus on the road, his grip on the steering wheel, calm, steady. Everything about him screamed control. From the way he maneuvered through traffic with effortless ease to the expensive yet understated black Aston Martin he drove. It didn't make sense. Who is this man? Elena wasn't stupid. No regular customer just offered a ride to a struggling waitress he barely knew, not unless he wanted something. She exhaled sharply, forcing herself to break the silence. "You didn't have to do this." Jonathan's eyes flicked toward her before returning to the road. "I know." "Then why are you?" A pause. "You looked like you needed help." Eleanor's fingers clenched. "I can handle myself," Jonathan hummed lightly. "Sure, that's why you were about 5 seconds away from breaking down back there." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't ask you to analyze me." Jonathan sighed. "I'm not trying to analyze you. I'm just stating what I saw," she huffed, turning to look out the window. The blurred buildings and trees passing by did nothing to slow the pounding of her heart. She hated this, feeling exposed, vulnerable. She had spent 2 years building walls around herself, convincing everyone she was fine. And yet, in less than 24 hours, Jonathan Whitmore had somehow managed to see right through them, and she had no idea how to feel about that. "I know what it's like," Jonathan said after a moment, his voice quieter this time. Elena frowned, turning back to him. "Know what? Trying to convince the world you're okay when you're not." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. She hadn't forgotten what he said earlier about losing his wife, but she had assumed he was different. A man like him, with a car that cost more than her entire apartment building, couldn't possibly understand what it was like to struggle, and yet there was something raw in his words, like he knew exactly what it meant to wake up every day and feel like you were just barely surviving. Elena swallowed hard. She could ignore the expensive suit, the polished exterior, but she couldn't ignore the pain in his voice. She knew that pain. She lived with it every day. For the first time since she got in the car, her body relaxed, just slightly. When they pulled up in front of Willow Creek Elementary, Elena was already reaching for the door handle before the car had fully stopped. Jonathan barely had time to put the car in park before she bolted out, rushing through the front doors of the school. His fingers tapped against the steering wheel as he debated whether to wait. He should just leave. He had already done more than enough. Driven. Her here made sure she got to her son safely, but for some reason his hands stayed firmly on the wheel, and he waited. Inside the school, Elena was led through the hallways by Principal Andrews, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but a serious demeanor. Liam started feeling sick right after lunch, the principal explained as they walked. He was shivering, and his fever kept climbing. Elena's heart clenched. She should have been there. When they reached the nurse's office, she spotted her son curled up on the cot, his tiny body wrapped in a thin blanket. "Mommy?" Liam's voice was hoarse, his usually bright blue eyes dull with exhaustion. Elena's throat tightened as she rushed to him. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing damp hair from his forehead. His skin was burning hot. She turned to the school nurse, her voice urgent. "Does he need a hospital?" The nurse shook her head. "Not yet, just rest, fluids, and some fever meds. But he shouldn't be alone tonight." Elena almost laughed bitterly. Of course he shouldn't be alone, but who's supposed to watch him while I work? Her mind spun through the impossible choices before her. Stay home with Liam and lose her paycheck. Go to work and leave him alone, risking his health. Neither was an option. She took a slow breath, pressing her forehead against Liam's, her fingers shaking as she smoothed his hair. "I'll figure it out," she always did, but this time she wouldn't have to, because when she stepped outside, Jonathan was still there, waiting. Elena stopped short, surprise flickering across her face when she saw him leaning against his car. "You waited?" she asked, frowning. Jonathan shrugged. "Seemed like the right thing to do." Elena narrowed her eyes. "Why?" He hesitated. Then he said something that left her speechless. "I'll stay with him." Elena blinked. "What?" "If you need to go back to work," Jonathan said, his gaze steady. "I can stay with Liam." Her brain short-circuited. "No," she blurted, shaking her head. "You don't even know him. I know he needs his mom. And I know you can't afford to lose your job," Jonathan said simply. "So let me help." Elena stared at him. The man who had walked into her life less than a day ago was now offering to take care of her son. It was insane, it was ridiculous, and yet, somehow, she believed him. Liam shifted in her arms, whimpering in his sleep, and Elena made a decision. She looked at Jonathan, really looked at him, the sharp angles of his face. The exhaustion beneath his carefully controlled expression. She didn't know why, but she trusted him. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Jonathan held her gaze. "I know." She took a breath. Then, for the first time in years, she let someone in. "All right," she said softly, and just like that, her life changed. The drive back to Elena's apartment was thick with silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind where two people were both too lost in their own thoughts to break it. Liam, wrapped in a small blanket in the back seat, was fast asleep, his fevered face pressed against the window. Jonathan focused on the road ahead, while Eleanor sat tense, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. She still couldn't believe what was happening. She had just let a man she barely knew drive her sick child home. What the hell am I doing? But when she glanced at Jonathan, his sharp features softened in quiet thought, his grip on the steering wheel steady, she felt something unexpected, not fear, not unease, but a strange sense of calm. And that terrified her more than anything. The apartment complex wasn't much, a worn-out, low-income housing unit on the outskirts of the city. Jonathan parked outside, his expression unreadable as he took in the cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, and the paint peeling from the building's exterior. Elena stiffened. She hated this part, hated the way people looked at where she lived, and assumed they knew everything about her. "I know it's not much," she muttered, unbuckling her seatbelt. Jonathan glanced at her, brows furrowed. "I wasn't judging," she hesitated, because for some reason she actually believed him. She turned away, pushing the car door open and moving quickly to unbuckle Liam from his booster seat. He stirred slightly, his small hands clutching onto her jacket as she lifted him into her arms. Jonathan followed, silent as he took in their surroundings. As soon as they reached her apartment door, Elena fumbled with the keys, her exhaustion catching up to her. When she finally pushed the door open, she almost winced. The place was small, just a cramped living room connected to a tiny kitchen with a single hallway leading to the bedroom she shared with Liam. No expensive furniture, no decorations, just the bare essentials. Jonathan stepped inside behind her, his presence too large for the tiny space. "You can, sit down if you want," she said, shifting Liam's weight in her arms. "I just need to get him settled." Jonathan gave a small nod and lowered himself onto the old couch, its fabric worn but clean. He watched as Elena disappeared. Down the hall, her quiet whispers soothing her son as she tucked him into bed, and for the first time in years, he felt like an outsider in someone else's life. Elena returned a few minutes later, her tired frame leaning against the doorway. "Thank you," she said softly, "for bringing us home." Jonathan nodded. "He's okay. For now." She sighed, rubbing her arms. "I just need to keep his fever down." She moved toward the kitchen, automatically reaching for the kettle on the stove. Tea. She needed something to keep her awake. Jonathan's voice broke the silence. "You do this alone every day?" Elena stiffened. She kept her back to him, pretending to focus on the water. "Yeah, it's just me and Liam." A pause. "Then, what about his father?" Her grip on the counter tightened. "He's gone." The words were flat, final. Jonathan recognized that tone. It was the same one he used when people asked about Emily. But unlike him, Eleanor didn't have the luxury of grief in solitude. She had a child to raise, a job that barely paid the bills, and no time to fall apart. Jonathan exhaled. "That must be hard." Eleanor let out a bitter chuckle. "That's one way to put it." She turned around then, crossing her arms. "What about you? You said you lost your wife." His jaw tensed. "Yeah." "How?" Jonathan hesitated. He didn't talk about Emily, ever, but something about the way Eleanor looked at him, not with pity, but with understanding, made it impossible to dodge the question. "Car accident," he said finally. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. "My husband too," she murmured. "Drunk driver." Jonathan's chest tightened. There it was again, that unspoken connection. Two people trying to keep going after their world had fallen apart. Elena poured herself a cup of tea, then hesitated before grabbing another mug. She placed it on the coffee table in front of Jonathan, the steam curling into the dim light of the room. Jonathan glanced at it. "What's this?" "Tea," she said dryly. "People drink it." A beat. Then a ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was the first time Eleanor had seen any kind of warmth on his face. "Thanks," he muttered, taking the cup. Eleanor sat across from him, her exhaustion evident. She should have been wary of him, should have been kicking him out of her apartment right now, but for the first time in years, she felt something close to safe, and maybe, just maybe, he did too. Jonathan set his cup down, glancing at the clock. "I should go." Elena nodded, suddenly. Unsure of what to say, he stood, smoothing out the sleeves of his jacket before meeting her gaze. "Will you be okay?" She exhaled. "I always am." Jonathan didn't look convinced, but instead of pushing, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small white card, and handed it to her. "My number," he said simply. Elena frowned. "Why?" "In case you need anything." She hesitated before taking it. "Thanks," she muttered, unsure if she meant it. Jonathan gave her a small nod, then turned toward the door. But just before he stepped outside, he stopped. "Elena." She looked up. "You don't have to do everything alone." Her breath caught. But before she could respond, He was gone, leaving her standing there holding onto a number she never planned to use, or so she thought, because fate had other plans. The next 2 days passed in a blur of exhaustion and feverish nights. Eleanor barely left Liam's bedside. She sat beside him, pressing cool cloths against his burning forehead, whispering soft reassurances every time he whimpered in his sleep. By the second night, the fever finally broke, but the weight of everything, the missed shifts, the unpaid bills, the sheer exhaustion, remained. She had called the diner earlier that day, begging for another chance, but her manager's voice had been clipped and indifferent. "You miss another shift, Elena, and I'll have to replace you." It was a warning, one she couldn't afford to ignore. So despite her aching body and the gnawing worry still lodged in her chest, she made the decision. She had to go back to work. Liam was doing better. He wasn't fully recovered, but she had no other choice. She just had to hope it was enough. Eleanor stood by the small window in her living room, arms wrapped around herself as she stared out at the dark, empty street. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest like a stone. She had no one to call, no friends nearby, no family willing to help. David's parents had cut her off after his death, blaming her for the accident that took their son. There was only one number left. Her fingers brushed against the business card sitting on the coffee table, the one Jonathan had given her 2 nights ago. She had told herself she wouldn't use it, that she could handle this on her own. But Liam stirred weakly in the bedroom, and the reality crashed into her all over again. She swallowed hard, picking up the card, dialed the number, and held her breath as it rang. Jonathan had just poured himself a glass of whiskey when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He frowned. No one called him this late. When he saw the unknown number, he almost ignored it, but something, instinct maybe, made him pick it up. "Hello?" Silence then, a quiet breath on the other end. It's Eleanor." Jonathan straightened immediately. He hadn't expected this. His grip tightened around the glass. "Is Liam okay?" "He's better," she said quickly. "Still weak, but better." A pause. "Then why are you calling?" His voice was softer now, but his mind was already working through the possibilities. Elena exhaled shakily. I have to work tomorrow night, but I don't have anyone to watch him." She sounded like it physically hurt to say the words. Jonathan's chest tightened. She hadn't wanted to call him. That much was obvious. She must have spent hours debating it, trying to convince herself she didn't need help. But she had called anyway, and that told him everything he needed to know. "I'll be there," he said simply. Elena hesitated. "You don't have to." "I'll be there," he repeated, firm, unwavering. And for the first time in a long time, Elena let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The next evening, Jonathan arrived at exactly 6:30 p.m. Elena had expected him to cancel, to change his mind. But when she opened the door, he was there, standing on her doorstep in a simple grey sweater and dark jeans, looking almost casual, as if this was something he did all the time. Liam peeked out from behind her, his small face still pale but curious. "You came," Elena said, surprised at her own relief. Jonathan shrugged. "I said I would." Liam tugged on Elena's sleeve, whispering loudly, "Mommy, is he my babysitter?" Jonathan's lips twitched in amusement. Elena sighed. "Something like that." Liam studied him for a moment before crossing his arms. "You don't look like a babysitter." Jonathan crouched down to meet Liam's gaze. "And you don't look like a kid who's supposed to be in bed." Liam grinned, a spark of mischief in his tired eyes. And just like that, Elena knew she had made the right decision. By the time Elena returned from her shift, it was almost midnight. Her entire body ached from exhaustion, but her mind was racing with nerves. What if something went wrong? What if Jonathan realized this was a mistake? She didn't know what to expect when she opened the door, but what she saw stopped her in her tracks. Jonathan was sitting on the couch, a storybook open in his lap, Liam curled up against his side, fast asleep. The sight was so achingly normal that for a second her heart clenched in ways she didn't understand. Jonathan looked up, his voice quiet. He fell asleep halfway through the story. Elena swallowed, stepping forward. "You read to him?" Jonathan closed the book, his expression unreadable. Seemed like the right thing to do. Elena stood there, something shifting inside her. For so long it had just been her and Liam. She had been alone for so long. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't. Jonathan carefully lifted Liam, carrying him to the bedroom. Without another word, Elena followed, watching as he tucked the boy in, his movements careful, practiced, and that was when she knew. He had done this before. She whispered, "You've done this before, haven't you?" Jonathan's back tensed, a long silence stretched between them before he finally spoke. "I used to read to my son every night." Elena's breath hitched. Jonathan turned to face her, his eyes dark, haunted. He died before he was even born. The silence between them was heavy. Elena stood frozen in the dim light of Liam's bedroom, her eyes locked onto Jonathan's haunted expression. He died before he was even born. The words hung in the air, fragile yet devastating. She hadn't expected that Jonathan had spoken about losing his wife, but never about losing a child, and now standing in her tiny apartment, with Liam sleeping just a few feet away, the weight of what he had endured pressed against her chest. She swallowed. "Jonathan." But he shook his head, his jaw tightening. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. Elena hesitated. She knew that look, the way grief built walls, how it made people push away before they could be pulled under. She had done the same thing, still did. But something about seeing it in him, in this man who had stepped into her life unexpectedly, who had cared for her son as if it were the most natural thing in the world, made her want to reach through it. She stepped forward. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jonathan let out a soft, bitter chuckle. "No one's ever asked me that before." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Then maybe you should." Jonathan looked at her, searching, and then, to her surprise, he did. They moved to the small living room, Jonathan settling onto the worn-out couch while Elena made tea, more for the distraction than anything else. The room was quiet, except for the soft whistle of the kettle. Finally, Jonathan exhaled, staring down at the cup in his hands. "Her name was Emily," he began. Elena sat across from him, listening. She was everything. Smart, stubborn as hell. Always saw the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. His lips twitched slightly, a ghost of a smile before it faded. "We tried for a baby for years," he continued, "and when it finally happened, when we finally saw those 2 pink lines, she cried." Elena's fingers curled around her mug. Jonathan's voice was quieter now. "We were so damn happy. Then his expression darkened, and then one night it was over before I even understood what was happening. Elena's chest ached. Jonathan didn't go into details, but he didn't have to. She could hear it in his voice, see it in his shuttered eyes, the sheer helplessness of watching something you love disappear before you can stop it. "Emily didn't make it either," he said after a moment. "I lost both of them that night." Elena inhaled sharply, tears burning behind her eyes. She had thought she knew what kind of loss Jonathan carried, but this was deeper, more than just losing a partner. He had lost a future, a lifetime of first steps, late-night feedings, birthdays, and bedtime stories, gone before they ever began. No wonder he had been so good with Liam, because he had once imagined doing the same for his own son. Elena set her cup down, hands shaking. "Jonathan, But he looked up, and the raw grief in his eyes stole the words from her throat. "I don't know why I told you that," he murmured. Elena swallowed. Because you needed to. Jonathan let out a breath, his hands rubbing over his face. Maybe. A pause, then quieter. It doesn't change anything, though. Elena frowned. What do you mean? He met her gaze, his expression tired, resigned. It doesn't bring them back, he said simply. No matter how much I talk about it, no matter how much I try to fix other people's lives. Elena's stomach twisted. Is that what he thinks he's doing? Fixing my life? She shook her head. You're not fixing me, Jonathan. He held her gaze. Aren't I? Elena's breath hitched. Not because it was true, but because a part of her had started to believe it too, that maybe, just maybe, he had been the one thing she needed but never knew to ask for. And that terrified her, because she knew what happened. When you let people in, you lost them, and she wasn't sure she could survive another loss. The clock ticked past 1 a.m., the tea long forgotten on the table. Elena rubbed her arms, suddenly cold. You should go, she murmured. Jonathan's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. Yeah, he said quietly, standing up. Elena walked him to the door, unsure of what to say. There was a shift between them now, something neither of them had expected. She had let him in, and he had let her see a part of him no one else did. She should have been relieved when he stepped outside. Instead, her chest ached. Jonathan paused, one hand gripping the doorframe. I meant what I said the other night, he murmured. Elena frowned. About what? His gaze held hers. You don't have to do everything alone. Elena sucked in a sharp breath, but before she could say anything he was gone, and for the first time in years she didn't feel so alone anymore. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Jonathan hadn't called, Elena hadn't either. She told herself it was better this way, that she needed the space. But then why did she keep looking at her phone? She hated it, the way her chest tightened. Whenever she thought about him, the way her mind kept replaying that night over and over again. You don't have to do everything alone. The words had hit harder than she wanted to admit, because for the first time in years, she was starting to believe them, and that was dangerous. She had spent too long learning how to survive on her own, depending on someone else. It wasn't an option. Not when people always left in the end. It was a Saturday afternoon when she saw him again. She was rushing through the grocery store, barely keeping track of what she could afford, when Liam tugged. On her sleeve. Mommy, look! Elena turned and her stomach dropped. Jonathan was standing near the produce aisle, hands in his pockets, studying a row of apples with far too much concentration. He looked different, dressed in dark jeans and a simple button-up, without his usual expensive suits. He seemed almost normal. If she didn't know better, she would have thought he was just another man running errands. Except she did know better. And that was the problem. Jonathan hadn't noticed her yet. She could walk away, could pretend she hadn't seen him. But Liam had other plans. Mr. Jonathan! Elena's eyes widened in horror as her son's voice rang through the aisle. Jonathan turned, blinking in surprise. Then his gaze landed on her, and just like that, there was nowhere to hide. Elena forced a smile as Jonathan approached, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hey, she said, adjusting the basket in her hands. Hey, he echoed, studying her carefully. Liam beamed up at him. What are you doing here? Jonathan glanced at the apples in his hands. Buying fruit, apparently. Liam giggled. You don't look like a fruit guy. Jonathan smirked. What do I look like? Liam thought for a moment. Like a serious guy. Elena groaned inwardly. Liam. Jonathan chuckled, his eyes twinkling. Serious, huh? That bad? Liam grinned. Not bad. Just different. And just like that, the tension between them softened. But Elena wasn't ready for this. She shifted uncomfortably. We should probably keep going. Jonathan's voice stopped her. Elena, she hesitated. His gaze was steady, calm. But there was something in it. A quiet concern she wasn't sure how to handle. You never called, he said simply. Elena's stomach tightened. She knew this conversation was coming. She just didn't know how to have it. "I didn't need to," she said carefully. Jonathan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Right." And for some reason, that single word hurt more than it should have. They were at the checkout when it happened. Elena reached for her wallet, her mind already calculating how much she could afford. She had $42 left in cash. She had only grabbed essentials, but still, it might not be enough. The cashier rang up the total. $47.90. Elena's stomach dropped. She hesitated, quickly scanning through her items. Take out the bread. Maybe the eggs, too. Before she could speak, Jonathan had already stepped forward, slipping a bill onto the counter. "Sir, this isn't—" Jonathan cut her off. "It's fine." Elena snapped her head toward him, heat rising in her cheeks. "What are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. Jonathan raised a brow. "Helping." "I don't need help." Jonathan exhaled. "Elena, it's $5, not a lifetime commitment." She gritted her teeth, mortified. "I can pay for my own groceries," she snapped. Jonathan's gaze was calm, unreadable. "I know you can," he said quietly, "but you don't always have to." Elena wanted to be angry, wanted to throw the money back at him, to prove she could do this alone. But Liam was watching, and deep down, a part of her knew. This wasn't about the money. This was about something bigger, something scarier. So she swallowed her pride. She let the cashier finish the transaction, and for the first time in years, she let someone stand beside her, even if it was just for a moment. Jonathan carried one of the grocery bags as they walked toward her car, ignoring her protests. She didn't understand him, didn't understand why he kept showing up, why he kept trying to break past the walls she had spent years building, and yet he was here, not pushing, not demanding anything in return, just here, she exhaled, stopping by her car. "You didn't have to do that," Jonathan shrugged. "I know." A pause, then softer. "But I wanted to." Eleanor's chest tightened. She opened her mouth. To say what, she wasn't sure. But before she could speak, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and instantly, her stomach turned to ice. The caller ID flashed a name she hadn't seen in months. David's mother. Elena's fingers trembled as she stared at the screen. She hadn't spoken to them since they cut her off after David's death. Why were they calling now? Jonathan noticed her expression. "Everything okay?" Elena swallowed. "I don't know," she admitted. She took a breath and answered the call. Elena's fingers trembled as she held the phone to her ear. She hadn't spoken to David's mother in nearly a year, not since the last time they told her, through clenched teeth and cold stares, that they wanted nothing to do with her. And yet, here she was, calling. "Hello?" Elena's voice was quieter than she intended. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then, "Elena." The sound of Margaret Carter's voice made her chest tighten. It was the same voice that used to welcome her into their home, that used to call her sweetheart before everything fell apart. Now it was colder, sharper, as if it carried every ounce of resentment they had never let go of. Elena swallowed hard. "Is something wrong?" Another pause, then, "It's been 2 years, Elena. 2 years since my son died. And we haven't seen our grandson once." Elena's breath hitched. "Liam, so that's why they were calling." Her grip tightened on the phone. I didn't think you wanted to." Margaret's voice sharpened. "You never even asked." Elena squeezed her eyes shut, anger and guilt warring inside. You made it clear how you felt about me," she whispered. Margaret exhaled sharply. "I was grieving. We all were." Elena bit her lip. "You blamed me." Silence. Then, softer. "We lost our son, Elena, and all we had left was a woman we barely knew, raising a child we never see." Elena's chest ached. She wanted to be angry, wanted to remind them that she had lost more than just David. She had lost her home, her support system, the only family she thought she had. But before she could say anything, Margaret spoke again. "We want to see him." Elena's stomach clenched. She had spent 2 years protecting Liam from this exact moment. 2 years convincing herself that if they didn't want her, then they didn't deserve him. And now they were asking. She inhaled sharply. I need. Time to think. Margaret hesitated. All right, then, softer. Thank you, Elena. And just like that, the call ended, leaving Elena standing there, shaken, conflicted, and completely lost. She barely registered Jonathan's presence until she lowered the phone, exhaling shakily. That sounded intense, he murmured. Elena forced a weak chuckle. Understatement of the year. Jonathan studied her carefully. Do you want to talk about it? Elena hesitated. Did she? A part of her wanted to keep it to herself, to shove it deep, down like she always did, but another part wanted to let him in. She rubbed her temples. That was David's mother. Jonathan didn't react, just waited for her to continue. She swallowed. They want to see Liam. Jonathan raised a brow. And that's a bad thing? Elena let out a bitter laugh. They cut me off after David died. Told me I wasn't part of their family anymore. Jonathan's jaw tightened. And now, out of nowhere, they want a relationship with him? She scoffed, shaking her head. I don't know if I can trust them. I don't even know if I want to. Jonathan leaned against the car, crossing his arms. Do you think Liam would want to know them? Eleanor opened her mouth, then stopped. She didn't know. She had spent so long keeping him safe from that part of her life. She had never even considered if he might actually want it. Jonathan seemed to read the conflict in her eyes. You don't have to decide right now, he said. Elena exhaled. I know. But even as she said it, she knew this wasn't something she could ignore. She leaned back against the car, staring up at the sky. The evening was settling in, the first stars peeking through the darkening sky. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, do you ever get tired of it? She asked softly. Jonathan glanced at her. Of what? The weight of it all. His lips pressed into a thin line. Every day. Elena swallowed hard. Yeah, me too. A long silence stretched between them. But for the first time it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt safe. Like for just a moment neither of them had to carry it alone. Jonathan exhaled. You'll figure it out, Elena. You always do. She turned to look at him. How do you know that? A small, knowing smile tugged at his lips. Because you remind me of someone who never gave up. Elena's breath caught. She didn't have to ask who, because she already knew the answer, and somehow that meant everything. That night, as she tucked Liam into bed, Elena made a decision. She wasn't sure if it was the right one. She wasn't sure if she'd regret it, but as she sat beside Liam's small bed, brushing his hair back gently, she knew it wasn't just about her anymore. She took a slow breath and sent a text. They can meet him, but on my terms. She put the phone down, her heart pounding. She wasn't doing this for Margaret. She wasn't even doing it for David. She was doing it for Liam, because maybe, just maybe, he deserved to know where he came from. Even if it meant Elena had to face the past she thought she had left behind. The day arrived sooner than Elena was ready for. She had spent the last 3 days agonizing over her decision, second-guessing herself at every turn. Was this a mistake? What if they hurt him? What if they tried to take him from me? She had barely slept. Jonathan had called once, just to check in, but she hadn't known what to say, because the truth was, she wasn't okay. She was about to reopen a door she had slammed shut 2 years ago, and it terrified her. They agreed to meet at a small park near Elena's apartment. It was neutral, public, a place where she could leave if she had to. She dressed, Liam in his favorite blue hoodie, the one with the little dinosaur patch on the sleeve. He was excited. He didn't understand what this meant. To him, it was just another new adventure. But to Elena, it was everything. They arrived 10 minutes early. Liam ran toward the swings immediately, his laughter carrying through the crisp autumn air. Elena stood by the bench, arms crossed, stomach twisting, and then she saw them, Margaret and Robert Carter, walking toward them like ghosts from another life. Margaret had aged. Her once perfectly styled brown hair was streaked with grey, her face more lined than Elena remembered. Robert, always the quiet one, looked smaller somehow, like losing David had taken something permanent from him. Elena steeled herself. She wasn't here for them. She was here for Liam. Margaret's gaze went straight to the little boy on the swings, and just like that, her cold expression cracked. A hand covered her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Elena's chest tightened. She hadn't expected that reaction, hadn't expected tears to fill Margaret's eyes, her hands trembling. She had expected anger, resentment, not this. "He looks just like him," Margaret choked out. Robert nodded, silent, his eyes wet. Elena clenched her jaw. "You wanted to see him, now you have." Her words were sharp, defensive, but Margaret barely noticed. Her gaze stayed on Liam, her grandson. "Does he know who we are?" Margaret finally asked. Elena exhaled. "No, not yet." Margaret swallowed hard. Can I talk to him?" Elena hesitated. Then, slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. Liam ran up moments later, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his bright blue eyes, David's eyes shining. "Mommy, who are they?" Elena's throat tightened. She crouched down, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sweetheart, this is your grandma and grandpa." Liam blinked. "Like Daddy's, Mommy and Daddy." Margaret let out a quiet sob. Elena swallowed hard. "Yeah, baby, just like that." Liam turned toward them, studying them with his usual curiosity. Then he grinned. "Cool. Do you like dinosaurs?" Margaret let out a choked laugh, wiping at her tears. I think they're wonderful." Robert finally spoke, his voice thick. "I used to take your dad to the museum to see them when he was your age." Liam's eyes lit up. "Really? Can we go there too?" Elena's heart clenched. Margaret looked at her, hesitant, hopeful. Elena exhaled, rubbing her temple. "This is for Liam. Not for them. For Liam." "Maybe," she murmured. Margaret smiled through her tears, and for the first time in years Elena wasn't sure how to feel. Liam was happily playing, running between the swings and the slide, while Margaret and Robert watched. Elena sat stiffly on the bench, wary, guarded. Jonathan's words echoed in her mind. "You don't have to do everything alone." Margaret turned. To her, voice softer. "Thank you." Elena frowned. "For what?" Margaret exhaled. "For giving us this chance. I know we don't deserve it." Elena's stomach twisted. "You don't," she admitted. Margaret flinched, but nodded. "I regret so much, Elena," she whispered. "I was angry, losing David." She let out a shaky breath. "I thought I needed someone to blame." Elena clenched her jaw. "And you picked me." Margaret's voice broke. "I was wrong." Elena looked away, fighting the storm of emotions rising inside her. "You said things to me that I can't forget," she whispered. "I know," Margaret whispered back, a long silence. "Then," Margaret hesitated, "I don't expect you to forgive me, Elena. But I do hope that maybe we can try. For him." Her gaze flickered to Liam. Elena's heart ached. She didn't know if she could ever fully forgive them, but she knew one thing for certain. Liam deserved to make that choice for himself. So she took a slow breath and nodded. "One step at a time," she murmured. Margaret let out a breath she'd been holding for years, and for the first time since David died, Elena felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't walking through this alone anymore. The days after the park meeting were filled with quiet changes. Margaret and Robert didn't push. They didn't demand to see Liam every day. They didn't act as if the past never happened. Instead, they did what Elena had asked. They took it one step at a time. And little by little, Liam began to know them. At first it was small things. Margaret bringing a book about dinosaurs because she remembered Liam's excitement at the park. Robert telling him old stories about David when he was a boy. Then it became more weekend trips to the museum. Short visits after school. It wasn't perfect. Elena still struggled with trusting them. She still woke up some nights wondering if she had made a mistake. But every time she saw Liam's happiness, the way his eyes lit up when his grandparents arrived, she knew she had done the right thing, and that mattered more than anything else. It was nearly midnight when Eleanor's phone rang. She frowned. Sitting up in bed, when she saw the name on the screen, her breath caught. Jonathan. She hesitated for only a second before answering. Hey, he echoed, his voice deep, quiet. Elena smiled slightly. You're calling late. Jonathan chuckled, softly. So are you. A comfortable silence stretched between them. Then, how did it go? Jonathan asked. Elena exhaled, sinking back into the pillows. Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. Jonathan hummed. That sounds about right. She let out a small laugh. Yeah. Jonathan paused. Are you okay? Elena swallowed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know how to answer that. For so long, she had lived in survival mode. She had taken things one day at a time, never stopping to ask herself if she was okay. Because the answer had always been, no, but now she wasn't sure, because for the first time in years, she wasn't carrying everything alone. She had Jonathan. She had her son's laughter. She had a future that no longer felt impossible. She took a slow breath. I think I will be, she admitted. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, then, softly, almost like a promise. Yeah, he murmured. I think you will be too. A week later, Jonathan showed up at Whitmore's diner. He hadn't been back since that night, the night he told her about Emily and their unborn son. And yet, here he was. Elena saw him the second he walked in. She wiped her hands on her apron, walking toward him before she could talk herself out of it. You came back, she said, raising an eyebrow. Jonathan smirked. Wasn't sure if I was still welcome. Elena crossed her arms. Depends. Are you here for coffee or a lecture? Jonathan chuckled. Coffee. She rolled her eyes, but grabbed a mug, filling it. Jonathan took it, watching her carefully. You're different, he said after a moment. Elena blinked. What? You're lighter, he said. Less like you're waiting for the world to fall apart. Elena stared at him, caught off guard. Then, to her own surprise, she smiled. Maybe I finally stopped waiting. Jonathan tilted his head. Yeah? Elena took a deep breath, nodding. Yeah. And for the first time she really meant it. That night, Jonathan walked her home, not because he had to, not because she needed him to, but because he wanted to. The air was crisp, winter creeping in. They walked in silence, but it was the kind that didn't need to be filled. When they reached her door, Jonathan hesitated. Elena frowned. What? Jonathan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I was thinking about what you said, he murmured. About stopping waiting for the world to fall apart. Elena's heart pounded. He looked at her, his gaze steady, serious. Maybe it's time I stop waiting too. Elena's breath caught. Jonathan took a step closer. Not too close, but close enough. He wasn't asking for permission. He wasn't making a move. He was simply letting her know that if she was ready, so was he. Elena swallowed. For years, she had been afraid of opening that door, of letting someone back in. But standing there, with the cold night air swirling around them, she realized something. Jonathan wasn't asking her to forget the past. He was simply asking her to believe in the future, and for the first time in years, she did. So she smiled and whispered, "One step at a time," Jonathan smiled back. "One step at a time," he agreed. And together they took the first one, and that, my friends, is the story of her silent cry. A tale of love, loss, and the quiet strength it takes to start over. But before we wrap things up, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know. I love seeing how stories like this bring people together from all over the world. And if this story moved you, if you found yourself rooting for Eleanor and Jonathan, feeling the weight of their struggles, or simply enjoying the journey, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on another heartwarming, emotional, and unforgettable story. There's so much more to come, and I'd love for you to be part of this amazing journey. Lastly, thank you. Truly. Thank you for watching, for supporting, and for sharing in this experience with me. Your time means the world, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Until then, stay inspired, stay connected, and keep believing in the power of a great story.